My name is Linda Parker, and I turned 62 the night I almost disappeared from my own story. I had gone out to celebrate my birthday, expecting nothing more than pasta, laughter, and the warmth of family. But instead of candles glowing on a cake, I was handed 5 words on a folded piece of paper that changed everything. It was 7:05 in the evening at Bellini's, a little Italian bistro in Portland. The kind of place where the smell of garlic bread wraps around you like a hug. My son Jason had chosen it because he knew it was my favorite. I thought the night would be simple, maybe even perfect. But life has a way of slipping a twist into the quietest moments. The note came from a stranger, a young waitress I barely noticed before she brushed past my table. On that piece of paper, in rushed handwriting, were words so urgent they made my stomach drop. Don't drink that. I can still remember how the room seemed to tilt, how the hum of conversations faded into a dull buzz. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass, and suddenly even the simple act of lifting it to my lips felt dangerous. Looking back, I realized that was the moment when the mask of my family's perfect picture began to crack. And it all started with one birthday toast. Bellini's was glowing that night, the kind of soft amber light that makes even a Tuesday evening feel special. The wooden tables carried the polish of 100 shared meals, and the air was heavy with garlic, basil, and freshly baked bread. Couples leaned close in quiet conversation. Families clinked glasses. For a moment, I let myself sink into that comfort, believing I was safe in it. Jason sat across from me, full of warmth and pride. He had chosen this restaurant because he knew I loved their chicken parmesan. I could feel his affection in the way he looked at me, as if he was saying, without words, "Mom, I want this night to be yours." That simple thought swelled in my chest. Then there was Brooke, my daughter-in-law, beautiful, poised, always polished in a way that made me feel clumsy beside her. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that felt studied, almost like she had rehearsed it before walking in. I told myself I was overthinking, yet deep inside, I felt that stiffness press against me. As the evening moved on, I noticed something small. Her hand trembled when she lifted her glass. Just a flicker, barely there, but enough to register. My mind wanted to ask why, but my heart pushed the thought aside. It was my birthday. I wanted to hold on to joy, not suspicion. At 7:10 that evening, I told myself to relax, to stop picking at shadows. But even as I did, another thought crept in. Why had Brooke, for months, been so insistent about my health, about the teas she brought? The reminders that I had repeated myself, I brushed it away, choosing celebration over worry. But sometimes, the cracks in a picture show long before the frame breaks. Just as I was about to lift my glass, something unusual happened. The young waitress leaned toward the table as if to clear a crumb, but her hand moved quickly, almost too smoothly. When she walked away, I noticed a folded slip of paper resting near my plate. At first, I thought it was just part of the check, but the neat square looked too deliberate. I slid it under my napkin, and my heart began to pound. Inside the restroom, I opened it with trembling hands. 5 words stared back at me in rushed handwriting. Don't drink that. Your life is in danger. Trust me. I stood there frozen, the tiled walls pressing in on me. My mind fought for explanations. Was this a cruel prank, or a mistake meant for someone else? But I couldn't shake the image of the waitress's eyes, so steady, so urgent, as if she carried a truth too heavy to say aloud. When I returned to the table, I forced my face to stay calm. I picked up my glass again, trying to look natural while Jason asked for more bread. In that small distraction, I made a choice that still feels surreal. I switched my glass with Brooks, as quietly as sliding a piece across a chessboard. My thoughts screamed inside me, if I'm wrong, I'll have to live with the guilt. If I'm right, this glass is no longer mine to carry. At 7:14 that evening, the restaurant felt like it had changed its shape. The laughter, the soft music, the glow of candles, it all blurred into background noise. I sat there pretending nothing had happened, while everything had. And then, all I could do was wait. I lifted my glass again, this time knowing it wasn't mine anymore. I tried to smile, to breathe, to act as though nothing inside me had shifted. Jason's voice was warm, carrying stories about his work, little details of his life he thought I'd enjoy. I nodded, but my ears only caught fragments. My eyes stayed on Brooke. At 7:19 that evening, I began silently counting in my head. 1 minute, 2, I waited, my heart pounding louder than the clinking of cutlery around us. Brooke raised the glass to her lips without hesitation. I studied her face, searching for any flicker of change. For a few moments, everything seemed painfully normal. She laughed politely at something Jason said. She lifted her fork, steady as ever. For a split second, I wondered if I had been foolish, if that note in my pocket was nothing but a mistake. But then it happened. Her hand paused mid-air, pressing to her stomach. The brightness in her expression dimmed. Her fork slipped against the plate, the sound sharp enough to silence the table beside us. A shadow crossed her face, confusion mixed with pain. She whispered something I couldn't quite hear, but her body said the rest. Her hands trembled. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead, even though the restaurant was cool. At 7:24, the atmosphere in that room changed completely. Chairs scraped the floor as people stood. Someone gasped. Jason leaned toward her in alarm, his voice breaking, while I sat frozen in place, gripping the edge of the table as though it could anchor me. Sirens grew louder outside, and when the red and blue lights streaked across the front windows, I knew the 5 minutes I had been counting down to were over. And with them, so was any illusion of safety I had left. The ride to the hospital felt both endless and blurred, as if time had stretched and folded at the same moment. I sat in the back of the ambulance, the siren wailing above us, the smell of antiseptic and plastic sharp in my nose. Jason clutched Brooke's hand as though he could keep her tethered just by holding on tight enough. I kept my hands folded in my lap, too rigid to move, too terrified to let them tremble. Inside my mind, the questions began to claw. If that glass had been meant for me, what did that mean? Was I nothing more than an obstacle to Brooke, a burden she wanted out of the way? A door she could close so she could control whatever was left behind. The thought lodged itself in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. By the time we reached St. Vincent Medical Center, my nerves were stretched so thin I could barely walk. They rushed Brooke through double doors, leaving Jason and me in the waiting area. The smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint sound of intercom announcements. Jason paced the floor, lost in shock, his words tumbling out in broken fragments, searching for reasons: food poisoning, an allergy, anything simple. I couldn't tell him the truth yet, not until I knew for certain. At 8:05 that evening, I sat down on one of those hard plastic chairs, staring at my hands. They still carried the memory of that glass, And I knew deep down I had just stepped into something far darker than a birthday gone wrong. And the real answers were only beginning to surface. When the doctor finally appeared, I already knew the news would not be good. His shoulders sagged. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had spoken too many truths in one day. At 8:40 that night, he told us what the tests had shown: digoxin. The word itself felt heavy, even clinical. But I knew enough to understand. It was a heart medication, something that could stabilize in careful doses. But in high amounts, it turned lethal. He explained it gently, but my chest still clenched as if the poison had touched me too. Brooke had nearly died from it, and yet deep inside, I knew she had never been the intended victim. My mind began tracing backward through months of little gestures that suddenly made terrible sense. The teas she had brought me, promising they would calm my nerves. The way she insisted I looked tired, that I was repeating myself. The articles she left open on Jason's tablet about dementia and financial planning. For a while, even I began to believe her. I wondered if I was slipping away, losing myself piece by piece. But now I saw it differently. She hadn't been helping me, she had been preparing the story, building the picture of a confused older woman who might need someone else to manage her life. It was calculated. I sat beside Jason, my heart breaking for him. He still searched for innocent explanations, clinging to the hope that this was a tragic mistake. I couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded note. I told him everything: how the waitress had warned me, how I had switched the glasses, how close I had come to being the one behind those hospital doors. And in that moment, I saw the color drain from his face as he realized the glass had never been meant for his wife. It had been poured for me. Not long after the doctor left us, a woman in a gray suit stepped into the waiting room. She introduced herself as Detective Sandra Cole, and from the way she carried herself, I knew she had walked through countless rooms like this before. Her calm wasn't cold, it was steady, practiced, like someone who had seen people break under truths too heavy to hold. She asked me simple questions at first. Had Brooke ever given me food or drinks, any supplements? I wanted to dismiss it, but the memories rose too easily. The herbal teas she pressed into my hands, the soup she brought when I said I felt tired, the vitamins she insisted would help with my energy. At the time, I thought she was caring, but standing there, with digoxin in her bloodstream, I understood those acts differently. Detective Cole's eyes didn't miss much. She listened, nodded, jotted a few notes. Jason sat beside me, his face pale and torn. I could see the fight inside him, the part that still wanted to believe his wife loved us, and the part that was realizing she might have been weaving something much darker. By 9:15 that night, officers had already collected Brooke's purse from the restaurant. Inside, they found pill bottles with the labels scratched off. The evidence would go to the lab, but my stomach already knew what it would show. For months, Brooke had been gaslighting me, chipping away at my confidence, making me question my own memory and judgment. I had almost believed her story, and if not for one waitress with steady eyes, I might have surrendered my life to it. But this was only the beginning of what the investigation would uncover. The next morning, Detective Cole arranged for me to meet the young waitress who had slipped me that note. We sat across from each other in the hospital cafeteria around 10:30, the hum of vending machines filling the silence. Her name was Maya Lopez. She looked barely out of her teens, nervous but determined. When she spoke, her voice carried both fear and resolve. She told me she had recognized Brooke not as Jason's wife, but as someone she had once known under a different name. 2 years earlier, Maya's grandmother had been in a care facility, healthy, sharp, independent. But once a new caregiver named Brooke Turner started looking after her, everything changed. Maya said her grandmother began forgetting things, growing weak, and within 6 months, she was gone. Doctors called it heart failure. Maya never believed it. She remembered Brooke bringing teas and vitamins, just as she had done with me. She remembered the same polished smile, the same careful tone. But back then, Maya was too young to fight it. This time, when she saw Brooke again at Bellini's, she refused to stay silent. That was why she wrote the note and took the risk of slipping it onto my plate. Her words left me shaken. The pattern was too clear to ignore. Brooke wasn't just reckless. In one moment she had a history, a method, maybe even other victims no one had connected before. I reached for Maya's hand, gratitude swelling in me. A stranger had chosen to act, and because of that choice, I was still alive. At 11:05, Detective Cole confirmed they would be reopening old records. For the first time, I realized this was not only about me, it was about a trail Brooke had left behind. That afternoon, Detective Cole told me Brooke had regained consciousness. Part of me wanted to turn away, to let the law handle it. But another part knew I had to see her. If I didn't face her, the questions would gnaw at me forever. When Jason and I walked down the hospital corridor around 1:20 in the afternoon, my steps felt heavier with each stride. An officer stood at the door, and inside, Brooke was propped up in bed. Her skin was pale, but her eyes were sharp, alive with something I couldn't name. The moment she saw us, her expression softened into practiced vulnerability. She tried to look fragile, almost grateful, but I wasn't fooled anymore. I stayed near the door, refusing to be drawn in. Jason moved closer, torn between love and horror. I spoke plainly, my voice steadier than I expected. I told her I knew about the note, about the glass, about the months of careful manipulation that had chipped away at my confidence. Jason's eyes filled with pain as he realized the depth of her deception. And then it happened. For just a heartbeat, the mask slipped, her eyes hardened, cold and calculating, before she caught herself and let the tears return. But I had seen it. That flash of truth was all I needed. In that moment, I understood that Brooke wasn't acting out of panic or desperation. She had planned this. She had built it piece by piece, weaving lies around me and my son. At 1:20 that afternoon, standing in that hospital room, I felt something unexpected, not fear, but clarity. I had looked into the eyes of the woman who wanted me erased, and I knew her performance was finally cracking. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews, paperwork, and evidence being pieced together. Detectives pulled Brooke's phone records, her internet searches, and the unmarked pill bottles taken from her purse. Everything pointed to planning, not impulse. She had looked up lethal dosages, drafted financial documents that would have given her access to my accounts, even searched care facilities as if she was preparing to push me out of my own life. Jason and I were called into the courthouse more than once to prepare for trial. Reliving the night at Bellini's in front of lawyers and strangers was exhausting. Each detail I repeated brought back the smell of garlic bread, the sound of her fork hitting the plate, the panic in Jason's eyes. Still, I knew my voice mattered. When the trial began, Maya testified too. She spoke about her grandmother, her suspicions, and how she had recognized Brooke that night. She was steadier than I expected, her courage filling the room. The defense tried to paint Brooke as overwhelmed, as someone who snapped under stress. But the evidence told a different story, a story of calculation, control, and cold intent. At 4:45 one afternoon, the jury returned, guilty on all counts, sentenced to life without parole. I felt no triumph as I listened, only relief. Relief that the truth had been seen, that my voice and Maya's had been heard, and that Brooke's mask could never be worn again. After the verdict, I knew I couldn't stay in the same house where Brooke's shadow lingered in every corner. The kitchen where she handed me tea. The living room where she told Jason I was repeating myself, those walls carried too many echoes. I sold the house and found a small cottage near Sauvie Island. It wasn't fancy, but it sat by the water, wrapped in trees. And the first morning I woke there at 6:40, I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee and felt something I hadn't in months: peace. Jason began visiting every Sunday. We cooked together, chopping vegetables side by side like we hadn't done since he was a boy. At first, his eyes carried guilt, the kind that weighs down a man who feels he failed to protect his mother. But with time, that guilt softened into gratitude. Therapy helped us untangle the knots Brooke had tied between us. He admitted he thought believing her meant he was being a good husband. Now he understood that in trying to be loyal to her, he had lost pieces of me. Maya became part of my new life too. We met for coffee, sometimes walked by the lake, and I learned about her dream of finishing nursing school. I offered to help with tuition. It felt right, an act of gratitude for the life she had saved, and a way to honor her grandmother's memory. I planted flowers in the garden outside my cottage. Each morning, as I turned the soil, I reminded myself that healing isn't about forgetting the darkness. It's about choosing life, over and over. Looking back, I see how close I came to losing not just my life, but my dignity and my bond with my son. Brooke almost convinced us both that I was fading, that my memory was slipping, that I needed to hand over control. She nearly stole everything I had worked for. But she failed. What I gained through this ordeal is something no one can take away: the certainty of my own strength. At 62, I discovered that survival isn't only about escaping danger. It's about reclaiming your voice, your worth, and your place in the world. Now, when I sit on my porch around 7:30 in the evening, coffee in hand, listening to the soft sounds of the lake and the birds settling into the trees, I feel grounded in a way I never had before. I am no longer afraid of growing older. Age doesn't mean weakness. Age means resilience, wisdom, and the courage to see through lies. To anyone listening, if someone ever makes you doubt your own memory or question your own mind, pause. Listen to that quiet voice inside you. Protect yourself, and never be ashamed to seek help. If this story touched you, I hope you'll like this video. Share it with someone who might need strength today, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Because survival is not just about living through the worst, it's about choosing joy again afterward.